Well, hello everyone. Good to see you again. Welcome to Bible in 1 Year. We're going to dive into the book of Habakkuk, and this is actually one of my favorite Old Testament books. And I just feel that so many of us, as we read this book, we can actually, many of us, relate and even understand. Here's Habakkuk, and he's just extremely burdened. In fact, in chapter 1, verse 1, it says in the NIV, it says, the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. However, in some translation, it actually says the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. And that's what it was to him. I mean, this was a burden. And in summary, here's what's happening. You see, the life of Israel and the world around him has just gotten horrible. I mean, the Torah, it's being neglected. There's violence. There's injustice. The leaders just seem fine with all the bad that is going on. And so here's Habakkuk just burdened and crying out to the Lord to do something. And something surprising actually happens here. You see, the Lord, he responds, and he basically says that he's fully aware of all that's happening, that he's going to have the army of Babylon, all right, to bring down justice. But if you're Habakkuk, he's just, you'd be confused. I mean, he's like, but Lord, I mean, aren't the Babylonians even worse, than what's happening here? I mean, they're more violent. They treat humans like animals. I mean, how can you use such a corrupt nation to do something like this to your people? And so as we read this, I can't help but just think how many of us can relate. I mean, maybe it's on a global scale and what's happening within our world, right, with the politics, with COVID, with all that's happening. And maybe it's just even more personal. I mean, you see injustice of how you're being treated, or maybe you're dealing with marital or relational issues. And just because you don't understand all that is happening, you still cry out to God, like, Lord, why? Why is all this happening? But here's what I love about Habakkuk's approach. Does he have questions? Yes. Is he burdened and desperate and can't reconcile what bad things are happening all around him? Absolutely. But what did you see in his approach? You see in chapter 2, verse 1, I'm going to read this to you. And this is actually not the NIV, but a little more literal translation. And I like what it says, but it says this. It says, I will stand at my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. There's really two things to point out here. One, he says, I will watch to see. In fact, some translations actually say, I will station myself on the watchtower. You see, this is a person who just waits patiently and gazes upon the tower for what is to come. So many of us, especially when we're in pain or we're having a hard time, we just expect an immediate answer from God, and we demand that he answers, and that he answers according to our schedule. But not Habakkuk. You see, though Habakkuk sees all the trouble around him, he's not demanding of God, he's not rushing God, but instead he trusts in God's timing, and he waits upon the Lord. I almost imagine him waiting, right? Not just for an answer, but he's waiting on the Lord before he even forms his own thoughts, before he forms his own opinions. It's almost as if he's wanting his thoughts to be, his own thoughts. And so that's the first thing, is the fact that he waits. The second thing is when it says, and what I will answer when I am corrected. You see, Habakkuk didn't come to God assuming that he himself is right? No, he understands that God's ways are higher. Though he can't reconcile all that's happening around him, he's actually coming to God knowing and understanding that God knows best. In fact, Habakkuk, right, is even expected to be corrected. You see, he came to God with humility. He even came to God knowing that, what he feels and what his initial thoughts, they actually could be wrong, and he needs to be corrected. You see, this is the exact opposite of how so many of us, we come to God. We believe that we are right and that God needs to explain himself to us. But here's the thing. After this whole back and forth conversation with God, I love how Habakkuk eventually responds in the beginning of chapter 3, verse 2. And many of us know this verse, but he says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. And Lord, repeat them in our day, in our time. Make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. You see, even though it's difficult to see God in the midst of all this hardship and pain, God could be calling you to remember what he has done, right? Both in scripture and even in your lifetime. Just think about how he saved you when you deserved, eternity apart from him, how he healed you physically, emotionally, spiritually. Again, undeserved, and it's just grace upon mercy. How he gave you the power to overcome, whether it's a temptation or a specific circumstance, or how he set you free, how he poured out his love upon you, how he protected you, how he provided for you. There's so much, but maybe today what he's calling you to do is to remember his fame and what he has done, and that you need to store up those testimonies in your soul. It's not random, but that word testimony in Hebrew means to do it again. And so when you recall what he has done, you will many times see a replication of what is to come. But you just need to start with recalling and give him credit for what he has already done. So, and he goes on, he says, repeat them in our day. And I just love that. This prayer is all about revival, and that God would awaken not only Habakkuk himself, but the people in the city. And I just love how amidst this gap with what is expected versus what he is experiencing, God is actually calling him to pray. And so in summary, so many of us are probably dealing with hard things, right? That we can't make sense with, and whether it's things that we see outside of us, or maybe it's what we're experiencing inside of us. But here are a few things to remember. And yes, it's totally okay to ask God questions. But number one, wait for God. Don't rush him, right? His timing is perfect. Trust and put your faith both in his character and in his ways. And so that's the first thing. Wait on God like Habakkuk did. Number two, come with humility and expect to be corrected, right? Know that he's perfect. His thoughts, his ways, his nature, everything. In fact, ask God to align your heart and your mind to his heart and to his mind. Number three, testify and remember. Though it could be hard to see God now, recall on what you did see God do. And in Revelations, many of us heard this, but it says, we will conquer the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. So testify. And number four, pray. Pray for revival. Pray for an awakening. Pray for a mighty outpouring. You see, nothing communicates desperation and dependence than prayer. And remember, every great move of God happens when he burdens his people to pray. So whatever you're going through, pray and ask God to move. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.